The Lewis River is one of southwest Washington's most striking waterways. It begins on Mount Adams from snowmelt and springs on its flanks and drains a basin of roughly 1,046 square miles before emptying into the Columbia River opposite St. Helens, Oregon. It's a river shaped by fire and ice, rich with life and human history alike. Long before settlers arrived, the Lewis River Basin was home to Native American peoples whose cultures were woven into the very pulse of the landscape. The river and the forests around it provided salmon, elk, wapato, and myriad plant foods that sustained generations. Salmon runs anchored seasonal cycles of gathering, trade, and ceremony. Anthropological records show the Lewis was occupied by various groups. Upper Chinookan-speaking peoples, known historically as Kathlaputans, as well as bands of the Tidnapum/Upper Cowlitz and Klickitat peoples, languages and cultures tied to the broader Sahaptin family. These groups fished and traded across the river networks of the Columbia system, connecting communities from the Gulf of Alaska to the inland plateau. The Cowlitz Indian tribe and the confederated bands and tribes of the Yakama Nation still steward cultural and ecological ties to these lands today. European-American documentation of the river began in the late 18th century. Early pioneers later applied the name Lewis River for Adolphus Lee Lewis, an early settler who established a land claim near today's Woodland in the 1840s. Near the confluence of the Lewis and Columbia rivers once stood the village of Kathlepotle, one of the largest seasonal gatherings on the lower Columbia, with hundreds of inhabitants at the peak of fish and elk seasons. The townsite was a hub of salmon runs, migratory bird harvests, wapato bulbs from the wetlands, and trade with groups as far away as coastal British Columbia and Alaska. Ecologically, the Lewis River watershed is a mosaic of forest, mountain, and river habitats. Its headwaters carved through the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, a patchwork of old growth and second growth forest. Streams carry snowmelt and rain down steep valleys, nourishing riparian corridors that support elk, black bear, deer, and scores of bird species, including bald eagles and ospreys. Fish are among the most significant ecological and cultural residents of the basin. In its natural state, the Lewis hosted abundant runs of Chinook, coho, and steelhead salmon, as well as bull trout and Pacific lamprey. These species migrate from the Pacific Ocean to spawn in the river's cold tributaries, a journey foundational to the river's ecology and to indigenous lifeways. But the 20th century brought dramatic change. 4 major hydroelectric dams were built on the Lewis River system. These dams now produce electricity for Northwest communities. However, they also block salmon from reaching the upper 170 miles of once prime spawning habitat, leaving hatchery operations to compensate for lost runs. The dams represent a classic trade-off in the Pacific Northwest. Cheap, renewable power at the cost of wild salmon access and the cultural continuity tied to those runs. In the 2000s, tribal governments, environmental organizations, and state and federal agencies negotiated agreements with improved fish passage facilities and habitat restoration. Today, the Lewis River remains a mix of wild and managed landscapes. Recreational users raft and kayak its rapids, anglers fish its streams and reservoirs, and hikers explore its forested canyons. Biologists monitor threatened fish populations while tribes and conservation groups push for greater salmon recovery. The river that fed villages for centuries still flows with energy and life, a reminder that history and ecology are inseparable. In tracing the history of this river, you hear not just a waterway story, but the story of people and place in the Pacific Northwest.